Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here. And I'm very thrilled, as always, to be joined by our friend Seamus Malekafzali. How you doing, friend?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be back.
Yeah, man, I'm really happy you're joining us from Beirut. We had you on the program pretty recently to talk about, Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran. But there's an update here after President Raisi passed away after his helicopter crashed into a mountain. There is now a new president in Iran. Could you tell us about this second round of elections and who won here?
Unlike how it is in America, it's constitutionally mandated in Iran for there to be another presidential election around 50 or so days after the previous president either resigns or dies. So this was set into motion very quickly afterward, and to many people's surprise, there was a major reformist candidate, Masoud Pezeshkian, who was allowed to run in that election. And what surprised even more people is that he was able to beat back not only five conservative candidates to get to the second round, but he won the election
Hmm.
pretty decisively with the majority of the vote. So he is going to be inaugurated in August on a platform that primarily focuses on re-engaging with the West on things like nuclear negotiations and aligning with international financial protocols and so on and so forth, as well as ending the mandate of the guidance patrol or the morality police that is in charge of enforcing mandatory hijab, which was something that
Mhm.
embroiled the country in nationwide protests back in 2022. So this is not someone who would be considered radical by like American standards. Obviously, this is not a leftist by any stretch of the imagination. Every single person who runs in Iranian elections who is authorized by the Guardian Council is some variety of right-wing Islamist. Um, but this is about as radical, I would say, that the Iranian political system would allow, and it caused a pretty huge stir.
Mm. I mean, it was a pretty interesting campaign. I mean, I believe it was you. This was maybe a few weeks back, but he was doing like kind of town halls with like young folks in Iran, correct? Where he was sort of taking some kind of pointed questions. I mean, it felt like there was a little bit of a kind of opening in an election where a lot of people thought that there would just be a kind of very general closed ranks of more conservative far right candidates or regime adjacent candidates.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I think when the Guardian Council authorized Pezeshkian, I think there was an assumption that it would work like other elections, and there's a reformist in the race, therefore turnout is going to explode, and therefore any concerns about the public legitimacy of the system will be assuaged. And in the first round, it was a disaster. It was the lowest turnout in the history of the Czech Republic. But in the second round, the turnout increased by around 10%, putting it more or less in line with American elections, but still not great
Mm.
by the standards set by the government itself. No, I mean, when people, Iranian people, saw that there was a chance at some level of change, even if it was a kind of change that was advertised by candidates before and wasn't exactly novel, a lot of people would want to jump at that. I think, you know, the idea that was pushed by the opposition abroad that every single person who didn't vote was completely against the Islamic Republic and thought that voting was like some sort of war crime and all these different things. That's a bit assumptive. Um, if people see an opportunity for change, you know, there's still a general sense of malaise at the idea of how little things change overall, but people still will jump at that if you are presented with that opportunity. But nevertheless, even though turnout jumped in the second round, I'm still of the opinion that the general trend shows that the Czech Republic still faces a real bad crisis of legitimacy.
Mm.
Back in 2009, when Mir Hossein Mousavi ran with around the same platform that Pezeshkian did, turnout was, I want to say, 85%. around that that's completely unheard of for any American election. Um, so when Pezeshkian, with the same platform, generally speaking, runs and only gets 49% turnout, that's better than what people had maybe assumed, but that's not a great sign.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in a second, I sort of want to ask you about what you think may come of this. But just before that, he sort of has like an interesting, at least I was reading that he has an interesting relationship with Khomeini, who probably played a large role in him getting approved in the first place, because he seemed like one of the candidates a lot of people were sort of expecting to be axed. Is that a fair understanding here? Or like what, to the extent that you understand, is his relationship with Khomeini?
I'm not exactly sure of the exact details of the relationship with Khamenei, but I think I do know what you're referring to. Khamenei was the person who intervened on Pezeshkian's behalf. Not necessarily Pezeshkian himself, but last year before Raisi died, he had a discussion with the Guardian Council in which he had pointed criticisms of how restrictive they were with the disqualifications, and that it was the thing that was driving such a low turnout, and that there needed to be more space in any future election. And so when Raisi died, thus the election gets brought forward, and then Pezeshkian, someone who is a reformist, but obviously is not going to buck the system, that is the kind of person that you would want to put in as that sort of olive branch.
Mm.
That being said, even though Khamenei paved the way for this person to be selected as a candidate, as an approved candidate, um, before the election took place in the first round, he had made criticisms not by name, but telling candidates that they should not. Um, I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially not to trust in America too much, to not pick people
Mm.
who trust in America, who align themselves with America, and that can really only describe one person's policy platform. Um, you know, the roadblocks that Pezeshkian is going to encounter, I think, are still very much going to be there.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, this is sort of, I mean, so two questions here is what what can we sort of expect, and the second one maybe just frame it for the American audience out here. When we say like reformist, what is reformable, what is touchable about these? Because again, these aren't radical governments or anything like that. So what do we mean when we say like reformist? What kind of part of the system here are they potentially going to be interested in tweaking?
I mean, a reformist in the Iranian political sense is going to be somebody who advocates more of a liberalization of the system in terms of allowing more freedom of speech, freedom of the press, more rights for women. Um, Occasionally, like more engagement with the West, though the optimism for that I think is waning pretty considerably. Um, Things that adjust the country in a more, I guess you could say, progressive direction, but I hesitate to use that descriptor. But absolutely nothing within that would constitute a direct threat to the Islamic Republic as like a religious system. I really want to emphasize that. This is the big contention that opposition people have with it, that they don't want to buck religious governance. Um, Probably the most radical reformist major politician was, again, someone I mentioned earlier, Mousavi, who began his campaign in 2009 more conservative, became much more radical in his outlook as the campaign went on, and now at this time advocates a full referendum to change the governance system of the country. He's an outlier in this respect. Khatami, the former president, he didn't even vote in the last election. So there's space for, more opposition to the state, but not in a sense that it would disrupt uh, the primary authority. But again, I just want to emphasize Pezeshkian during the debates explicitly said that he was a conservative in his personal outlook and a reformist in his political outlook. So these are all very religious people. Khatemi, the primary reformist, he is a scholar. Rouhani, a moderate who aligned himself with the reformists, he was also an Islamic scholar. These are people of faith. These are people of religion. They're not going to have progressive views on things like gay rights, for instance,
Mm.
or be friendly to socialism at like as an ideology. But these are people who advocate some level of change.
Hmm. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Last thing I want to ask you is, I mean, how significant, do you think that this victory is? I mean, what do we think is kind of possible in terms of like maybe geopolitics and particularly for Iranian folks? I know there's like definitely some hope that they, as you were mentioning earlier, that morality police stuff will be sort of scaled back a bit. But you tell us, how significant you find this election to be.
I think it's very significant. I mean, this is the first reformist president since Khatami, so 20 years that Iran has not had one. Um, this is a man who, he even if he is holding against what is going to be a conservative parliament, obviously a supreme leader who is not going to be in favor of all parts of his agenda. This is someone who is going to appoint people to his government that are going to be in favor of diplomacy and I think, are going to take a very firm stand against the morality police within all the powers that the presidency can argue. Um, I don't think that, at least in the near term, I can't foresee anything huge and major happening, like, within the first year. But the president absolutely has the ability to change the atmosphere of the country's administration. This is what it's always been. Even if, they're not the commander in chief of the army, even though they don't, appoint, the chief justice, for instance, those powers are delegated elsewhere. I mean, you cannot make the argument that Iran was no different under Ahmadinejad than it was under Rouhani when the nuclear deal happened. These are people who obviously have huge powers unilaterally on their own to change the direction of things. Um, I think probably the thing that is most within its purview is stopping the operations of the morality police. That is something that he can probably affect on his own with people in his government. But outside of that, diplomacy with America is going to be very difficult. I think Biden, I don't think he's going to be interested in dealing with this, and Trump
If he
absolutely
even
will not.
knows what's
No,
going
that's
on.
not going to happen. And I mean, this is the thing that was of, I think, some contention, even if I, broadly speaking, agreed with what Pezeshkian was selling. The America that existed in 2015 is absolutely not the America that's going to exist in 2025.
Hmm.
I think negotiations, even if it's good to get the sanctions off, not only is it going to be probably impossible with America, it's also going to be a very difficult sell to Iranian conservatives, because like David, I'll ask you honestly, you're an Iranian nuclear official. You do literally everything in your power to abide by the strict regulations that America sets out for your own enrichment. And then Trump rips it up. And then for years afterward, you have to hold up your end of the bargain as your economy is destroyed. Um, and then the president comes in new one and says, let's do this all over again and hope it
Hmm.
works out better this time. That's, frankly speaking,
And
that's a
people
very
forget like
difficult.
how intense those regulations were, and in a lot of ways, like insulting the inspections for their program were.
No, it was severe. It was really restrictive. I mean, people saw it as like an abdication of Iran's sovereignty as a
Hmm.
country to develop its own nuclear power. And the result of Trump destroying that deal is that the Iranian people became more radical in what they want. I mean, previously there would have been no discussion of a nuclear weapon in any serious area of the media, of power, of anything. When that's been suggested, it's been shot down. It's been shot down hard. But now it's openly discussed, the idea that Iran needs a nuclear deterrent, that America can't
Hmm.
be trusted, and it can't be trusted to the extent that Iran needs a nuclear weapon in order to make sure that America abides by its agreements. That's
Hmm.
that's the state that Pezeshkian is going to have to contend with.
Yeah, I mean it's truly truly devastating political reality. Seamus, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us on short notice. Could you just remind folks about where to go to keep up with all of your great work?
You can read my work at Seamus-Malekafzali.com. I have an article up about Pezeshkian from before the election that you can read there, and also something about Biden's Iran policy that was published about a week ago.
Well, wonderful, folks. We'll put a link down below. And again, Seamus, thank you so much.
No problemo.